These are the Monitor Audio Silver 5i speakers. They came out in 1999 and they were the smallest floor stander in that product line of the time. There were two bookshelf models beneath them, the 3i and the 4i, and three larger floor standers above them, which were the 7i, 8i, and 9i. Monitor Audio was founded in 1972 in Taversham, England, near Cambridge, by a man named Mo Iqbal. His first design was the MA1. Monitor Audio became known for their metal drivers. In 1985, Monitor Audio introduced their first metal dome tweeter. In 1986, Monitor Audio introduced their gold tweeters. This new design was very linear and moved the first order breakup to 35 kilohertz, which is beyond human audibility. In 1991, Monitor Audio introduced their C-Cam drivers. These drivers are ceramic-coated aluminum. They're very rigid and light enough to yield very high efficiency. This C-Cam technology is still used in their designs today. The Silver range was launched in 1999. It was Monitor Audio's first run into the budget speaker range, as their previous offerings cost significantly more. As previously mentioned, the 5i was their smallest floor stander in this line, and they were sold for $999 US retail, which is approximately $1,200 Canadian. They came in three finishes: stained black veneer, cherry veneer, and a light wood veneer. Their finish is quite attractive, but not as well done as some other offerings in the same price range or higher. The Silver 5i speakers are a 2.5-way bass reflex design, housing two 5-inch C-Cam woofers and a 1-inch gold dome tweeter, with crossover points set to 2 and 5 kilohertz. They stand 32.5 inches tall, 33.5 with their spikes, and they're 7 7/8 inches deep and wide. Their base measures 9 by 9 inches by 1 inch tall and has inserts to install floor spikes if required or desired. They have a rear 2-inch port and a compartment for sand filling if so desired. Sand filling will help dampen the cabinet resonance and will tighten up the bass to a degree, and will make the speakers more stable and less easily knocked over if you have little ones running around. They have two sets of binding posts on the rear in the event you'd like to try bi-amping or even bi-wiring if so desired. They have a frequency range of 38 Hz to 25 kHz with an 8 ohm nominal rating, a sensitivity of 89 dB at 1 watt per meter, and a maximum SPL of 108.5 decibels. Their minimum recommended power amp requirement is 30 watts per channel, and they can handle up to 150 watts per channel with 250 watt peaks. Let's move on to setup and sound quality. The Silver 5i proved to be quite finicky with respect to placement. I found huge differences in sound quality depending on position. With bad placement, the sound can be totally bloated with very recessed mid-range. When correctly positioned, the listener is rewarded with clean, quick sound and upfront mid-range. These speakers need to be placed well away from room boundaries, and in my room they did their best with a small amount of toe-in. If pointed straight ahead, the soundstage is too vague. Toed in too much and the sound becomes too pinched. With a widely spaced setup and slight toe-in, the sonic image is truly expansive. In my room, which is approximately 20 by 16 by 8 feet, which is actually too big for the speakers really, they are placed along the long wall. They are pulled out from the back wall 3 feet and 3 inches, and they are spaced 8 feet and 8 inches apart from each other center to center, and approximately 9.5 feet away from me at the listening position. With this setup, the speakers produce a huge soundscape with very good to excellent clarity. Performers sound forward and are actually larger than life. When comparing to some of my other speakers, like my Epos M12.2s, my Epos ES14s, or my Rega Ela Mark 1.25s, or my ADS 470s, the singers seem physically far larger than on any of those other speakers, really bringing the performance into the room. Some listeners may prefer this type of presentation, whereas others might find it a bit too brash or lacking in subtlety. The Silver 5i's have very good clarity and sound great with female and male vocals alike. although I think they do a better job with female vocals if I were to be forthcoming. As mentioned, they produce a very big sound field, providing excellent width and good depth to the sound. They do not produce height to the same degree as they do width or depth, although I suspect that that could be ameliorated to a fair extent by tilting them back a few degrees. Now, their imaging is not as delineated as many other speakers I've tried, giving the listeners somewhat of a vague idea of placement of sound. That's not to say that they don't image well, they are simply not as pinpoint accurate as some of the other speakers I have on hand or others that I've heard in the past. Although they do produce bass down to the mid-30s, I suspect most people would likely want to add a subwoofer if full range sound is what they're looking for, particularly for home theater use. Without a sub, they can sound somewhat thin or somewhat light on some recordings. I suspect room size will be a significant factor in this, however. Now let's move on to some of the caveats of these speakers. As mentioned already, these speakers can be quite unforgiving. They can sound thin or bright with bad recordings. They are not forgiving at all in that regard. They have very good and extended treble, but it's not the most subtle in the world of audio that I've heard. Mid-range quality is very dependent on placement and ancillary gear. Bass tends toward leanness, but they can still belt out a believable kick drum when required of them. These speakers are best used in smaller to medium-sized rooms. Careful placement is a must, more so than with most speakers I have owned in the past. It can make a day and night difference in terms of sound quality, so be patient and experiment. Poor placement will result in dull sound with a lot of mid-range suck-out and boomy bass, which seems counterintuitive to the large forward sound that they do produce when you do set them up correctly. These speakers sound wonderful at lower to medium volumes, or even to medium-high volumes. However, they can sound hard and compressed in the mid-range at louder volumes, or if overdriven. They really do sound their best at medium volume, which is where they come into their own. Their described hardness can be mitigated to an extent by using warmer amplification. For example, they sound sweeter and more forgiving when I use my Sugden A48B integrated amp by comparison to my Exposure 2010 integrated amp, which can make them sound somewhat brash. I also suspect that their hardness at louder volume could be mitigated by having more power on tap. In my case, I'm unclear if my amp is running out of steam or if the speakers are simply showing their volume limitations. I could not verify this, however, as I don't currently have a high-powered amp on hand. Although they sound good with many genres of music, they may not be preferred by someone who likes to listen to loud rock. With busy rock music, they can sound quite congested and confused, particularly when the volume is pushed. I find them to be a bit too sterile or too cold to really rock out the way I like to. For that type of music, I think that most people would prefer a warmer, more full-sounding speaker. They really are great with the likes of jazz, funk, salsa, and more, however. And not only are these speakers good with two-channel music, but they also perform very well in home theater setups, offering a clear, dynamic, and impactful sound. Paired with a sub, they can be excellent for sci-fi and action movie watching, no question about it. In fact, I would rate them a 60-40 split in terms of home theater versus two-channel audio listening, with the 60% going to the home theater. That said, despite all of their positive traits, I have noticed that they can sound a little bit artificial over time. That's not to say they're not enjoyable or that they will grate on you. However, more experienced listeners may not find them refined enough for serious listening, myself included. Overall, though, I feel they're an excellent value on the used market. They have a big forward sound that many people will appreciate. With the addition of a sub, they can be used in a wide range of setups and room sizes. Additionally, they can be had for very reasonable prices, anywhere from $250 to $450 Canadian, depending on the location and condition. And for that kind of outlay, I believe they would make a lot of people happy. And they certainly kick any $250 to $350 soundbar right to the curb. So that concludes this video on the Monitor Audio Silver 5 Eyes. Once again, I'd like to thank you for watching, and we'll see you here again next time for my next video. Cheers, everyone.